Okay, I am now recording. Very good. So welcome back, everybody. We are here with the second installment, our keynote address from Meira Epstein. I'm going to put on the screen, if I can get all these things to stop jumping around here for a minute. Okay. Meira Epstein is really one of the authorities on our great sage and Torah commentator, Abraham Ebenezer, and especially having to do with his astrological texts, which he's been working on since the late 1980s. She's published translations in English of The Beginning of Wisdom, the Book of Reasons, and the Book of Nativities and Revolutions. I think she's working on the Book of Elections and the Book of Interrogations. She's going to explain to us how these are all part of the corpus of Ebenezer and what he intended to do when he was writing all of these different books. And she's also the author of the Sefer Yetzirah, translation, transliteration, and commentary, with special attention to the underlying philosophical origins, ancient Jewish mysticism, cosmology, and astrology. And her website is bear-star.com. She's the real thing. She's a professional astrologer. She's a teacher. She, like many of our presenters here, has this whole left brain, right brain balance thing going on because she had an entire second career as teaching English as a second language in Israel, and then she was a computer programmer on Wall Street. So we see that computers and math and that very linear way of thinking mixed in with the spiritual and mystical is kind of like the perfect balance. I highly recommend it. So we want to welcome you, and I'm going to just turn it over to you. You're able to share your screen, and we are going to enjoy learning with you today.
Okay, can I start?
Yes, please.
Apropos you, welcome everybody, and thank you, Lorelai. It's a real pleasure, real privilege, real everything. It's what an occasion. Like you said, it's a space, it's a safe space to bring together all our parts, and it's all understood. An anecdote from my Wall Street days, someone asked me, how come such a level-headed person like you and follows astrology? And my answer was exactly. So for me, it was always natural, all of these combined. Anyway, I'm going to share my screen. And since it feels like I'm speaking to myself, Lorelai, do you hear me?
I absolutely hear you. We all hear you well. We see you,
Okay,
and
good.
It's great.
Okay. So share the screen. And here we go. Okay. Lorelai, is it visible enough, the size and all that?
I see it fine.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So my goal is to cover a lot of ground today. As you can see in the title, Ebenezers Astrology and the Jupiter-Saturn Conjunction in Jewish thought, and actually another topic that's not even listed here. So it's quite a sweeping lecture. And I have to say in advance that if not all, then most of the things that I'll be saying will not be new to you, because we're all very well-informed crowd here. But I like to put it in a context the way I like to see things. So what we're going to see here is my take on things in certain ways. Okay, so this is where we start. First, what is Jewish astrology? Actually, I'd rather frame it as phrases as, is there a Jewish astrology? And I have to tell you right off the bat that I don't think so. I don't think there's a Jewish astrology, because I've been asked that many times. I think there is astrology. And for us, all of us, it's what's known as Western astrology. But there is a Jewish slant, and we all know that. And my way of combining the quest for astrology and the Judaism is summarized here a little bit. And what I wrote, it is the recognition that this orderly, purposeful, and magnificent astrological construct in the world is the handiwork of the divine wisdom. And that's clearly Jewish slant. It is the attempt to reconcile the human experience of the heavenly plurality and its good and evil forces with the tenets of religion and the belief that it has all one divine source. So all these are intellectual forces. And the last point is that it is all, and I'm sorry, and it is inextricably tied with the question of predeterminism, fate, and free will, surrounded with much pro and con. Astrology has never been too far from the Jewish people, and they both started in the same place, Ur Kasdim, which is Mesopotamia, as you can see in the map on the side. And we all started at the same time. Let's say the time of Abraham, which is around 1800 BCE, I believe, give or take 200 years. Same time as when astrology started making its first steps in Mesopotamia. That was the cradle of astrology. And before I continue, Abraham is always described as an astrologer, as he knew astrology, and there's a quote in the Sefer Bereshit about it, but that's very limited. While in the apocryphal text in Sefer HaYovlot, there was a whole story about Abraham being an astrologer and him watching the moon, going out on the roof to watch the moon at the Rosh Chodesh to see what the weather is going to be like. So there's a significant tradition that connects Jews to astrology right from the start, from Abraham on. Well, it was later in Babylonia, fast forward in Babylonia after the destruction of the temples, the first and the second, where Jews and astrology meet again. As astrology was maturing into the way we know it now. Because during the time, especially the destruction of the Second Temple era, astrology was really flourishing in Mesopotamia, and it created a huge foothold in the Hellenistic world in Alexandria, Egypt. So this was a significant time in astrology and in Jewish history at the same time. The Jews were, I'm sorry, my glasses are giving me problems. I need to get closer to the screen. The Jews were in their time and of their time. They always co-mixed with the cultural milieu around them, always curious, always inquisitive, and astrology pervaded the educated circles, and the Jews were not immune. As a matter of fact, Lorelei, in a detailed answer earlier, you did a wonderful job on your answer on Masala Israel, and you covered a great deal of this item as well in terms of the Jews being involved in all those studies. I'm saying astrology did not begin with the Jews, but of all the great monotheistic religions, Judaism embraced and preserved it in ways some visible and some less visible. This was one of my earliest realization years back when I started looking at astrology and Judaism, how pervasive it was, and ubiquitous it is in all the Jewish writing from way back until now. Of all the religions, we literally preserved it, literally embraced and preserved. To this day, we have allusion to astrology in both hidden and overt, in midrashic exegesis, in the language and liturgy, Rosh Chodesh practices, and of course in Kabbalistic mysticism. You can see at the bottom on the right, you see the Hebrew phrases that are literally astrology, whether some people know it or not. Mazal Tov, we all know. Everybody knows Mazel Tov. But the next one, B'Sha'a Tova, or Ad Mea V'Esrim, or the last one, Meshane Makom, Meshane Mazal. These are clear astrological statements that made their way into normal language, and people use them without knowing where it comes from. But this is pure astrology. So the challenges. Astrology raises immediate questions, philosophical, intellectual, moral, and theological. And this is what the Jewish mind loves the most. Drushing. Drushing is the anglicized verb to not to drush. That's not even Hebrew. To make to lidrosh, to discuss and discuss and discuss. So my rabbi calls it drushing. So we're drushing and looking for hidden meaning and hidden symbolism. In the Talmud, we find some well-known examples with pro and con arguments, which also evince knowledge of astrology itself. Now, Lorelei mentioned her thesis. So all the stuff that I'm about to show you, Lorelei covered in her thesis. And actually, there's nothing new here. I just like to put it together in one place. So just about all of it or most of it will be familiar to all of you, what I'm about to show you as examples from the Talmud. Now, before I continue, I apologize in advance for too much text in my PowerPoint. I had no choice. Also, I had to compile it from my older sources, older lectures. So don't try to read the text. I'll tell you if I want you to notice any special phrase, but I had to do that this way. So I'm saying that the first instance here is, it is a mitzvah. What is a mitzvah? The knowledge and the calculation of the heavens. And it's a mitzvah. It's not just a pursuit or a hobby. And the quote is here in the blue here. You can see it in the red frame. רבי יוחנן, מניין שמצווה על האדם לחשב תקופות ומזלות, שנאמר, ושמרתם ועשיתם כי היא חוכמתכם ובינתכם לעיני העמים. Long story short, how do we know it's a mitzvah? Because it has been said in Deuteronomy, Sefer Dvarim, that you should do it or calculate it because this is your wisdom and knowledge in the eyes of the Goyim, the other nations. It's like saying, maybe we know it's not as important as the worship of the true religion, but this is what the Goyim thinks. And this is how you can appear as very knowledgeable and wisdom and wise in the eyes of the Goyim. It sounds cute, but there's something there. But still, it's a mitzvah. But this does not say worship. It says calculation. Cheshuv tkufot umazalot. Tkufot is, in plain Hebrew, it translates to the word period. But the true meaning in the Hebrew sense is cyclical period. Cyclical periods, such as the sun coming back, the English chart, and every year when the sun comes to the Aries point again, it's cyclical movements of the planets, whether it's the moon, the new moon, or it's the sun coming back to the Aries point every year, and so on. So this is the use of the word tkufot in astrological writings. It's a very specific term. It's not just general period. It's more than that. Okay. And further down, I have a quote from the Ramban, who says that it's mitzvah, that people should be encouraged to do it. And then there's another source where it says it's not just be encouraged, it's a real mitzvah. So this is a clear statement about the importance of this knowledge, at least from the point of calculations. And of course, calculations are for calendric purpose. It's called Chokhmat Ibur, to calculate the annual revolution, the annual periods, the holidays, when Passover comes, when Rosh Hashanah comes. All this is one and the same, based on the movements in the heavens, the sun and the moon. Okay, next. Now here is the same thing. Ein Masala Israel and Yesh Masala Israel, and Lorelei covered that. Now the Yesh Masala Israel is more interesting because it runs against the party line, against the what we are supposed to think. And there's a famous anecdote, a famous story, which I quote here, as two rabbis have different opinions. Rabbi Hanina Omer says, Mazal machkim, mazal ma'ashir, ve'yesh mazal Israel. In other words, mazal makes you wise or knowledgeable, mazal makes you rich, and yesh mazal, there is a mazal to Israel. A word about mazal. The word mazal, it's kind of rich. In Hebrew, it has three levels of connotation. One is the word luck, but luck literally comes from the astrological luck. Now, in astrology, we use the word mazal as one of those 12 of the 12 signs, the 12 mazalot. But in the rabbinical literature and also in the manuscript that I work with and so on, the word mazal is usually used as a complete constellation, like the whole natal chart is usually referred to as mazal. So when you see the word mazal here, it's not limited to the one of the 12 signs. It means the whole cosmic constellation you are born with. So this is what I needed to say about mazal. So the anecdote is that there are two in Talmud Bavli, Moed Katan, it says Rabbav and Rav Chesda, two rabbis, they both were righteous and knowledgeable. One was praying and rain fell, rain came. The other one was praying, no rain came. One lived long enough to 92 years and the other one died at age 40. One had in their household had 60 chupot, 60 weddings, and the other one had 60 deaths. In other words, one had complete luck, a very fortunate life. The other one had very unfortunate life, and yet they both had all the merits, all the learning, they did everything they were supposed to do. So it's all attributed to luck, and luck being the astrological mazal. This is a very famous example contradicting the phrase ein mazal, and this is yesh mazal. Next is, 1 second, I need to watch my slides. Here's another one. Hakol tzafui v'hareshut netuna. All outcomes are foreseeable. All outcomes are possible in every situation, but the choice is given. And the world is judged by the action. I'm reading my own translation, the English translation on the left side. It is all given conditionally, and the trap is cast over all of life. The Hebrew is beautiful, and it's a beautiful metaphor. As if one goes into the store, and the grocer, and you can take everything, and the grocer gives you credit, or conditionally. And then there's a trap. In other words, you can get everything, but you have to have moral choice, and it's up to you to choose the right thing. Everything is possible, but it's about choice. And Rabbi Hanina at the bottom says, Hakol bidei shamayim chutz mirat shamayim. In other words, everything is written in the heaven except for the worship itself, for the work of God, yirat shamayim, the fear of God. That is up to us to choose. So, very different opinions. I just saw this one. Okay. Evidence of knowledge of astrology. This to me was very intriguing because this is not a pure philosophical or metaphysical discussion. This is really detailed, like technical, almost technical discussion. These people, they knew astrology. They literally knew it. Even though we don't find a complete horoscope delineation anywhere, but a lot of these items come from clear knowledge of details of astrology. And in this section, we see description, character description, based on the day one is born in. So this is not what we think of as a horoscope with the date and the time and location. That's not it. Just the day in the week. The day in the week. Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, v'chule. So this is called Mazal of the day. Those of you who know astrology more than others, or more in detail, would recognize it as what we call planetary day and planetary hour. So here on this screen, I have the planet, the day, what they say about the day. If you're born on Sunday, so you can see the on the left side, one is born on a Sunday, which is the day of the sun. It's in blue here. And then the person is described as all good or all bad. Why? Because light and dark were created. So immediately we see a connection between the astrological symbolism or what the sun represents, which the sun represents light, and the biblical description of Yom Rishon and what happened in Genesis on the first day. And so it goes. So Monday is also super interesting. We know that Monday is the day of the moon. And what's the description of the person? The person will be irascible. For on this day, the water was divided. So division means a division, like a conflict between things, and anger. So the person will be irascible. On Tuesday, day of Mars, the person will be wealthy and lustful. Lustful. Wednesday is well known. It's the day of Mercury. And it says the person will be wise and intelligent. On Thursday, day of Jupiter, the person will be charitable, very much a Jupiter word. For this day, fish and fowl were created. I'm tempted to go on the details, but I don't have time. I can analyze it a little bit further, all the astrological connections here. Friday, the day of Venus, the person will be courting, chazran in Hebrew, and I added of women. And the Rabbi Yitzchak says, courting of mitzvot. You see, this is the Jewish mind. It turns and I'm saying it in a positive way, taking things that are maybe general and giving them a Jewish slant to make them more, what's the word? More righteous, more religion oriented, more Jewish oriented, not just general statements. And of course, the last one is even more interesting. Saturday, Shabbat. And we know that Shabbat and Shabtai go together in Saturn, the day of Saturn. And they say that one born on Saturday, on Shabbat, will die on Shabbat. For the great day of Shabbat was desecrated for him. In other words, the midwife had to come and do work because the person was born on Shabbat. Clear connection between Genesis, astrology, and Talmudic thinking, Talmudic style. Now, the second part of it is similar to what we just saw, but now the distinction is not based on the day in the week, but the hour of the day. This is a clear astrological technique. I'm not going to explain it, no time. But it has to do with certain hours of the day have planetary association or rulership, and there's a scheme to it, but this is not the right place to explain it. Now, in a similar way, now it starts by, I'm going to read the text, my own text here, this one here. So the previous discussion gets heated when with another point of view, and the references to planetary rulers of the hour. So Rabbi Hanina said to them, to those people, go tell Ben Levi, it is not the mazal of the day that is the cause, but it's the mazal of the hour. And they continue in the same way, the hour of the sun, the hour of Venus, and so on. The sequence here is also very meaningful, the sequence of the planets, but again, this is too technical, too much astrology. So again, knowledge of specific techniques in astrology, very specific. When I first saw it, I loved it because it took me by surprise when I found it. Okay. Next. Again, specific knowledge of astrology. No, this I showed already. 9, this one. Marital law, matrimonial law, bad mazal, literally bad mazal. They said, if a woman gets married and the husband died and she gets married again and the second one dies, she should not get married to the third one. because she has a mazal gorem. Her mazal caused it. This is personal astrology, clearly allowing for mazal to be a consideration, understanding that it has a factor in life. This is, there was a variation of it. Another one said, okay, she can marry 3 times, but not the 4th time, just a different number, but it's the same idea. Next is this one. Again, more astrology in the law, responsibility for financial loss. What could that be? When one rents a donkey from another one and something happens to the donkey, who's responsible for the loss? The one who rented it or the owner? Does the owner have to replace and give the renter another donkey because it was his mazal? So the question is, whose mazal is responsible for the loss? And as I was seeing this for the first time, I said to myself, in modern life, insurance companies could never go with that kind of thinking, because there's always, you need to blame someone and that's it. This is, insurance policies could never be written with this kind of philosophy. Another one. One second, I'm still.
Wait, Miura, so it says that the person who rented the donkey is responsible, yes?
I don't want to take the time to read the whole section.
Okay.
I can make this this whole PowerPoint available as PDF if someone wants to see the text, but it's too detailed to get into it. All I'm saying is that all these discussions, especially those that have to do with the law, is whose mazal is responsible. Actually, in the previous one with the donkey, one says to the other, well, you know what, let's wait and maybe the donkey will come back so we both share the loss. Something like that. Where am I? This is 11. Okay. Mazal of the individual versus the collective. This is very interesting and it will come up again when we discuss Ibn Ezra, this whole idea of the mazal of the collective versus the individual. Now, the Hebrew phrase is very famous even in modern Hebrew, makat medina. Makat medina means an infliction that inflicts the whole medina, the whole world, or the whole country, or the whole countryside, or the whole village. Everybody is suffering from the same thing, like when you have a famine or drought or locust or something. So that's makat medina, infliction that affects everybody. So when one leases a field, it's a matter of leases a field from another, and then there is something happen and there's no crops in the field, you cannot pay the rent, they cannot pay the lease. So is the renter responsible? But if it's Makat Medina, the renter is not responsible, not his own luck. But if it's his own luck, then the renter must still pay the lease. And there's a definition here further down. How do you define? There's a way to define how much of the damage qualifies as Makat Medina, if it's limited to, and so on. So further down. Because these Talmudic rabbis, once they have a question, they drill down to every possible scenario and give you the exact law, how to evaluate the situation. My main interest is not the exact answer, but more the questions themselves, the dilemmas themselves. To me, they are fascinating. All my life, all my astrological life, I have always always gone in that direction, the conceptual questions that arise. Okay, so now here is the very famous one, super famous, Yechezkel, Chazon Yechezkel. Why am I bringing this up? To indicate the knowledge that they had, the Talmudic era. And Yechezkel was not the second the temple, but the first temple in Babylon after the destruction of the first temple. Well, astrology was already well ahead in those days. Not astrology as we know it, not about natal charts and things like that, but the movement in the heavens. They were already clarified and beginning to be well defined. So we have Yechezkel, which is about 598 BCE. And the image is very well known, this image of his Ezekiel's vision, Perek Aleph. And of course, it's the wheels and those living being or the holy animals, Hayot HaKodesh. Most people, all people, read this as a huge allegory about God's power and working in the heavens, but not to me. To me, it's a clear cosmological, astronomical description. Clear. I don't want to take the time to read the details to prove that, but I said that it's a vivid description of the motion and direction of the cosmic wheels, and those animals that are described. These are the markers of the four cardinal signs, heavenly beings. Usually they're translated in English as heavenly beings or something like that, because we don't want to call them animals, even though in Hebrew it's Hayot HaKodesh, Hayot. And why am I saying the four cardinal signs? If you read the details, you will see that those four cardinal signs, actually I can show you because I have the Hebrew here, so I'll do it very quick. It's in red, and I'll just show you this one here. Pnehem, Pnei Adam, Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Shor, Pnei Nesher. These are the water bearer, the lion, the bull, and the scorpion. Clearly, these are the descriptions of the four. And why are these the four cardinal signs? Because in that time, because of the precession of the equinoxes, those four constellations, and I'm talking constellations of fixed stars, indicated the four seasons and so on. So the bull was the springtime and so on. So Ezekiel's vision is clearly a description of the cosmos and the movement. East-west, we call it the diurnal movement. West to east, that's the movement in the zodiac. North-south, I can go on and on. I can translate every component of that vision into astronomy, pure astronomy. Of course, combining it with a vision of God means that God is above it all. And I don't have an issue with that, but I'm saying that these images need to be understood for what they are, and not just beautiful symbolic images. There's more to them. Okay, so now we're going to do fast forward, very like a 1,000 years or more than 1,000 years later, to 1194. I call it the Great Rift, and the great opponents, Maimonides, Ebenezer, and the rabbis of Provence. So all the stuff that I've shown you so far feeds into this topic, all of it. So I don't know if they are real or not, definitely not Ebenezer, but it's good image. Ebenezer and Maimonides, astrology at the crossroad. And here's the crossroad. In 1194, a group of scholars from the Jewish community in Provence wrote a letter to Maimonides seeking his opinion and help in resolving penetrating questions about astrology. This letter is known as the correspondence between the rabbis of southern France and Maimonides about astrology. Very famous document, and people have written a lot about it. And I'm in the process of writing more about it, and I've done it before, but I want to expand on it. So what we are going to see here is like a short version of what I would like to show about this item, about this document and the situation that it created. So, Maimonides. I'm not going to read all this because we all know who he was, what his role is, and his importance in Jewish history and Jewish theology. And we know about his life. He led a very comfortable life, even though very arduous work. He worked himself to, not to death, but to great fatigue as a physician in the palace of the caliph. But he created all this incredible Jewish learning at the same time. So he became an authority, major authority in the Jewish world. And um, one second, let me make sure. Yes. So that's my monetist part. Now, Ibn Ezra. I'll come back to the correspondence. I need to background this with Ibn Ezra. So now we have Ibn Ezra. Let me show this again. The dates. Maimonides born in 1138 or so. Ibn Ezra by that time was already an old man. Not very old, but mature, adult, very, very adult. I think he would be in his 50s or so at that time when Maimonides was born. So, Ibn Ezra. In Tudela, Spain, Ibn Ezra spent most of his adult life, just about most of it, wandering restlessly from place to place, staying within Jewish communities wherever he went. Throughout his travel, he always depended on the support of benevolent patrons, literally, for food and shelter, who respected his extensive scholarship and he kept writing and teaching everywhere he went. He was a true Rhodes scholar, and this is my own little joke. He was a Rhodes scholar. He was always on the road. Uh, his writing encompassed a lot of, in addition to biblical commentary, so extensive biblical exegesis, a large body of personal, huge, not just large, body of personal and liturgical poetry. Then some theological philosophy, Hebrew grammar, mathematics and astronomy, and the best of it, in addition to biblical commentary, an encyclopedic compilation of all astrological disciplines, from soup to nuts, from beginner to advanced. This is the material that I live in. Legend has it that Ibn Ezra and Maimonides met in person and at least once in Cairo, but there's no real evidence to it. And there's a beautiful anecdote, but it's only an anecdote. So this is Ibn Ezra, on the other side. One sec, and I need to make sure I'm in the right. So I'm saying that they never met in person. However, Ibn Ezra and Maimonides did cross paths. That's my take on it. Did cross paths historically and intellectually on the grounds of Provence. Here comes the rabbi of Provence. Ibn Ezra wrote almost all his astrological texts in a burst of productivity in 1 year or less than 1 year in 1148 in the towns in Provence. And he stayed there for a while, not too long. He never stayed too long anywhere, I think 2 years or so. And he was well respected and well received in that location. I'm saying that that location and that community, this was a ready-made audience, eager to learn everything there was to know about astrology, a fact that is quite evident in the correspondence, as we will see in a few minutes. As I have shown in my article, curriculum, this is my article, another article, not a book, but an important article, Curriculum by Design, Abraham Ibn Ezra Astrological Text. This compilation that Ibn Ezra put together in that year, compendium, that he put together that year, was organized as study material for beginners to advance. In other words, his goal was to write not just astrology books, but teaching material. And his style shows it, and that's what I do in that article. I analyze how he's writing and what he's writing to show that it was written not just to preserve the knowledge of astrology, but to teach. He's actually a teacher. His style, he speaks like a teacher. And it runs through all his books, that style of teaching. And I'm saying that he wrote it for these people because he wrote many of his books for the benefit of his patrons who supported him along the way. He dedicated it to them and so on. Now, the writers of the correspondence speak about one who has visited their places and taught astrology. Ebenezer's name is not mentioned, yet some of the text in the correspondence is an exact quote from Ebenezer's work. So this is what I show in my article, that it's very likely that Ebenezer is in the background of that correspondence. So now I want to show you some samples of what's in the correspondence to give you a sense of how intense that was, that correspondence. So the dilemma of the Provençal scholars was astrology, obviously. And here are the questions in purple. I'm saying that the questions demonstrate knowledge of the prevailing philosophy, the Talmudic debates, they have Talmudic quotes, as well as detailed familiarity with the practice of astrology. So I'm summarizing the questions. This is a short summary. Is astrology valid? Does it work in all circumstances? How can it be reconciled with religion and the values of prayer and merit? And what about Masala Israel? It's all included. What's interesting, they ask these questions out of real concern and even mental anguish. And I'm saying mental anguish. They say, if you, Maimonides, if you could give us at least one key for what we have asked, that would be of great use to remove some doubts and soothe the turbulent hearts. So you can see what astrology was doing. It was creating doubt in religion. And of course, Maimonides will never have any of that, as to be expected. Okay? I'm saying that is the kind of anguish that could result from the recognition of the veracity of astrology, which conflicts with a deep belief in a divine intervention. So I'm going to show you some of the questions, and I'm not going to read every detail. Like I apologized earlier, a lot of text here, but I don't like to leave anything out. So we'll just see the highlights in the red headlines. Is it all predetermined? Or can the power of the mind override that? Is it all, does the soul rise above the stars? Is personal control over the situation, is it relative to the predictive event? In other words, can you alleviate some of it or all of it? How bad is it? These are real questions. Number 3, again, the theological contradiction again. The belief in the immutability of the decrees of the stars. It's very clearly understood that the movement of the stars are eternal and immutable. They will always move at the same rate, at the same time. Nothing can change that. In that case, that leaves no possibility for the divine intervention. God will not change the movement of the planets. In many places, they end up with the conclusion that prayer is futile. In that case, the logical conclusion is that astrology makes prayer futile. And they use the word tfilat shav, which is also in the Talmud. Tfilat shav is right here. Tfilat shav means you pray for something, but it's void, it's useless. It will never happen. It cannot happen. And there is a clear prohibition, I don't remember where, but it's a Talmudic, I think, prohibition against tfilat shav. One must not pray for something that is of the impossible. Question is, what is the definition of the possible? But tfilat shav is a clear prohibition. Okay. Number 4 is interesting. Death, natural or deserved. There are many places, even in the Bible, where someone dies because God strikes them dead because they transgressed. So can we distinguish between death that is punishment from God or from natural illness? It's a valid question. Because why are they asking that? Because the astrological chart does indicate things like death. All these things are asked because they can be, to a lesser or greater degree, they are indicated in the astrological chart, and they know that because they know astrology. Again, in Masala Israel, they even ask some technical discussions, technical question, literally number 9 and 7 are technical question. Can you distinguish between different family members? The chart can talk about the parents. When I say talk, I mean have an indication for parents, for grandparents, for children, for in-laws, for cousins. How can you distinguish that? Number 7, can you predict disaster? And if you can you predict when it's going to happen? They mean big disasters, or where it's going to happen. You see, these questions, these technical questions, these rabbis assume that Maimonides knows astrology and follows astrology, because otherwise they would leave it alone with only with Ein Masala Israel. They're asking technical questions. They want to know how to do it. They really think he follows that. Okay. Next, more technical questions. The here's the question, the number 12 about changing of location. Meshane makom, meshane mazal. It's a clear doctrine. It's an astrological doctrine about relocation and how the astrological chart changes when you move to another place, and they know it, and that's the background for their question. Meshane makom, meshane mazal. In that case, tell us, oh great rabbi, tell us how far we should move. Is it enough to move to the next street over, to the next town, to the next village? How far should we go to get the effect? This is a technical question about relocation. Here's the Tfilat Shav again in number 11. I think this shouldn't be sufficient for, maybe there's one more that I like to show, one more. Number 16, this I get a big chuckle out of that. I call it birth control. But that has to do with the astrological doctrine of election. Election is not political election, but electing the good time, the good date, and the good hour to do something which will be successful. It's electional astrology. And they say to Maimonides, number 16, can an optimal moment of human conception or of any undertaking be elected so that a favorable nativity will be produced? In other words, I want to have a good baby, successful child. Can you tell us what the right moment is? By the way, the moment of conception, not of birth. This is ancient, old astrology doctrine about the astrological moment of conception, not of birth. So you can see how their knowledge comes through, shines through all these questions, how knowledgeable they were, which means they were active in it. It was in their culture, in their life. Okay. And number 15, can you ask a question about a third party? Is it valid? Or can you ask a question only about yourself? This is number 15 is pretty amazing in the context of astrology. So now Maimonides' response, to be expected, he chucks it all down. And he ignores the details of the questions and goes directly to the philosophical and theological conclusion, condemning astrology altogether, outright. He does it in a very abbreviated way. He summarizes many of his principles and many of much of his philosophy from the Guide for the Perplexed, Moreh Nevuchim. And it has to do with Greek philosophy. And it has big time to do with the theory of creation. And Gabriel touched upon it earlier to a point in Sefer Yetzirah. Has to do with the theory of creation. How is the world created? Because if it was created, if God created it ex nihilo, out of nothing, then God can do everything. God can do what God wants. If God wants to change the order of nature, God can do it. But if the world was not ex nihilo, had existed already, and what had existed is matter, M-A-T-T-E-R, the substance itself had existed already, only God did something with it. And Gabriel talked about it, and I also talk about it in my version of the translation. In my introduction, I discuss these things. This is major difference. This is a major philosophical difference and changes everything, changes the game completely. How the world was created. Is it Bria or is it Yetzirah? Is it creation or formation? And if it's formation, then matter, material substance had existed since ever. And so this ties into this philosophical understanding. Okay. And not to mention that Maimonides always refers back to the Torah HaNevuah. Torah HaNevuah means the doctrine of prophecy. I'm doing my own translation on the fly, so I'm not sure I'm using the right words. Torah HaNevuah. Who is the prophet who really had the truth from God? And of course, it always goes back to Moses, who was the only Navi Emet, the only one who really spoke directly with God, or the only God to whom spoke directly, while all the other Nevi'im had it like not secondhand, but not as directly. So Moses is the ultimate source. And if Moses says that the world was created in 7 days, then that's the truth. Now, in terms of, so this is the background for his answer. And he says, even the Greek philosophers did not claim that the planets compel people to do this or that. In other words, he's trying to eradicate completely the notion that we do things because a certain planet is in a certain place. He says it clearly, and he uses the Greek philosophers as a support, which is interesting. Okay. Maimonides claims that he has studied astrology. He says it literally. And he says he has read everything that there was to know about it and found it false. This is his statement as is. And I would suspect that he's right. I would suspect that he did, because with his mind, he would have been interested. Nobody was immune to astrology, but he had to come up with a conclusion what to do with that knowledge. And in my opinion, he made a clear, logical, rational decision instead of trying to drush it, to try find nuances, maybe yes, maybe no, maybe some. Rather than that, just eradicate it completely, ignore it, and don't even look at it. And that's the bottom line of his answer to those rabbis. He lumps astrology together with other types of divination, which only fools and feeble-minded people and women, all of us, please note, and women and children believe in it. His word includes women in the group of feeble-minded people. You can tell how I feel about it. And very authoritatively, his style is super authoritatively. He leaves no room for any argument. Authoritatively, he tells the Provençal rabbis to abandon astrology completely rather than look for truth in it. It's important to notice that at the time, Maimonides was involved in anti-messianic movements at the time. I'm sure I'm going to hear about it later on the panel. But it was a messianic movement in Yemen around the time, and that was very dangerous to Judaism, and we all know why. And that was even before Shabtai Tzvi. That was just dangerous. So He didn't want people to follow any other thought, any other doctrine. Just do the right thing, follow the mitzvot, don't think, just do. That's Maimonides. And here's the Hebrew text to show you about the women. כל המאמין בדברים האלו וכיוצא בהם ומחשב בליבו שהם אמת ודבר חוכמה, אבל התורה הסותם אינו אלא מן השכלים ומחסרי הדעת, ובכלל הנשים והקטנים שאין דעתם שלמה. Right here. So we women are not capable of thinking and logic according to him. Sorry, it's one of my high horses. I'm not going to repeat that. Okay. Now we come to Ebenezer's astrology. So after this whole episode, to Ebenezer specifically, and I'm calling it Ebenezer's complex relationship with astrology, unlike Maimonides. By the time of the correspondence, Ebenezer had passed away, but his teaching are echoed in the Provençal rabbis. Ebenezer was profoundly religious, and we know that. We know it from all his writing. Yet astrology did not seem to cause any conflict with his faith, to the best of my observation. It is evident throughout his work that he fully embraced astrology in a hard-nosed, intelligent way, with no doubts, no hesitation, and no religious dilemmas, at least not in writing. And we will see some of it later, some of it. He would be well aware of the potential contradictions, but the truth of astrology is too great to ignore, as we all know it. All of us sitting here, we all know astrology, and we know that it cannot be ignored. References to astrological doctrines are found in many of his biblical exegesis. Yet, there's hardly any crossover of religious thought in his astrological writings, because I looked. I found a handful or less that is touching upon it, but in a very interesting way. And in his introduction to Beginning of Wisdom, Reshit Chokhmah, we read this, but before I continue, the word Chokhmah needs to be understood as not so much as wisdom, even though that's how it's translated, because in modern Hebrew, Chokhmah is understood as wisdom. Chokhmah throughout Talmudic and rabbinical writing meant knowledge and science and learning, a discipline of knowledge. But for us, it plays well, including the word wisdom. But because that book is literally Introduction to Astrology, his first writing, his first book in the compendium, and he lays the foundation of astrology as we know it. The planets and the houses and the signs and the planets and the aspects. It's literally like a beginner's textbook. Reshit Chokhmah, the beginning. But he writes in the introduction, he writes something that gives you a sense of where his soul and his philosophy is. So it's in Hebrew here, but I'm going to read my English translation at the bottom. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God, Yirat Adonai, for it is the instruction. For when a man does not follow his eyes and heart to fulfill his worldly desires, then wisdom will rest in him. So he makes a philosophical a statement, and then he continues, moreover, the fear of God, should be capital G, the fear of God will protect him from the laws and decrees of the heavens all the days of his life. And when his soul separates from his body, it, the fear of God, will endow him with eternity, and he shall live forever. This is metaphysical, philosophical, but the rest of the text is plain, regular astrology. So the whole book is textbook of astrology, but this is in the introduction. Later on, we will see something that touches upon this as well. Okay, so this is beginning of wisdom. We have something similar in Sefer HaMoladot, the book of nativities, which was I would say the second or third that he wrote. Okay, The book of Nativity is further teaching in astrology. It's about the astrological houses. Now, in the introduction, he brings up something very important. Remember, we talked earlier about Makat Medina and the fate of the collective versus the individual. It comes up big time here. Astrology brings up the issue of fate, plain and simple, not only of the individual, but also of the collective. This is a central question which comes up every time a disaster strikes, affecting many lives. And I don't want to spell it out, but we all remember major disaster in the world in our time, affecting thousands of people. Astrology of the collective has been there for the start. It actually preceded the individual. In Babylonia, they started with astrology of the nation, of the king, not of the individual. It's mentioned in the Tetrabiblos by Claudius Ptolemy in the 2nd century. So it was a topic of discussion from the start, not just the person, but the collective. Nowadays, we call it mundane astrology. And of course, the question is, how can so many people, or are there many charts, suffer the same fate? Is it the same fate written in everybody's chart? And in the Sefer HaMoladot, the book of nativities, I'm reading further down. The question is methodological, about possible contradiction between the indication of the horoscope of the individual and that of the collective at times of misfortune and calamity. In other words, if the chart of the individual doesn't show any disaster, yet the person suffers or perishes, how can that be? Where was it written? That's the technical and philosophical. And Ptolemy talks about that too. When he writes about these things, I like the Hebrew phrases that he uses. You can see the Hebrew here. I'll read the Hebrew first. Dinei haklalim yevatlu hapratim. Koach ze haprat lo yuchal levatel haklal. Haprat lo yuchal levatel haklal. In other words, the individual cannot cancel the collective. The collective overrides. The individual is subsumed in the collective. So I'm going to make it very short, this particular slide. In other words, if the chart of the collective, and we can talk about what it means to have a chart of the collective, what kind of chart is that? But if the chart of the collective or the higher power indicates something negative happening, all the charts under that one, like let's say a king in a kingdom and all the subjects, they all perish in a war that the king started. So the chart of the king overrides or subsumes the charts of the individuals. That's the thinking. It's hierarchical. And you can call it a cop-out, like an excuse, like saying, because if it's not in the chart, does that mean that astrology doesn't work? No, it means that there's another chart that is higher than that. So it's kind of hierarchical thinking. And it's very powerful in Ptolemy and also here. Haklal, the general cannot, the individual cannot cancel the general. That's the gist of this thing. And it's in this book in Sefer HaMoladot. Now this repeats again in Sefer HaMivcharim, the book of elections. Remember, election is electing a good time to start something, like a wedding or a business or anything. He talks about the lot, the individual lot in life, not necessarily disaster, but just a lot in life. How fortunate or lots of fortunate one is and what affects it. And I'm going to improvise on this. I'm not reading every line. He says that it depends not only on the chart, but where and when one is born. In modern language, we would call it nurture versus nature. In other words, there's the chart and there's the condition one is born into, the society, the economic, socioeconomic situation, and so on, which is also affect the life. So this is the question. So he puts it in the same hierarchical sequence. So whatever the outcome in life will first depend on what kind of ethnic group you're born in, and then what kind of a nation are you in. And from that it goes down, it cascades, trickle down or drill down into social and natural environment that you're in. Are you wealthy or are you poor? I mean the family. Down to the individual level. The individual level is your own chart. And this is where the person must exercise knowledge, wisdom, and common sense. So there's this trickle down, cascading factors. At the bottom, or maybe the top, is the individual common sense and the power of the neshama, koach ha-neshama, the kochahi ha-chochma. This ties into the doctrine of the soul. There are three parts of the soul. There is nefesh, neshama, ruach. Three levels in the soul: nefesh, neshama, ruach. And the neshama is the highest place, and the neshama is the part that connects with God. And I know I'm rushing through a lot of doctrines, and I know you're familiar with all of that, so I can rush through it. So the koach of the neshama is that it's above the physical realities, and that has a power to change things. Easier said than done, but that's the doctrine. I say that in his very sobering style. In his sobering style, Ebenezer gives another reason for the need for faith. And he says that astrologers sometimes make mistakes, in judgment. And therefore, the righteous believer is more protected than one educated in the knowledge of the signs, since the believer is empowered by the soul. While we, the astrologers, I can make an error in judgment, and because I don't have the support of the neshama, just what I know or what I don't know, my own error. So this is the Sefer HaMivcharim. There's more in Sefer HaMivcharim that again ties into fate, but we don't need any more of that. Now here comes, for me, this is the icing on the cake per Ebenezer. His own personal reality. All of the above, all the things I just read to you, is not without personal experiential contradiction. In his poetry, we find a sober, pessimistic expression of his personal plight, the circumstances of his poverty and hard life, and the recognition that the decrees of the stars cannot be altered. He describes his life as existentially unlucky, and the Hebrew is unbelievable, and it's poetry. I have to read it in Hebrew. It has such a rhythm to it. It's very powerful. גלגל ומזלות במעמדם נטו במהלכם למולדתי. לו יהיו נרות סחורתי, לא יחשך שמש עד מותי. יגע להצליח ולא אוכל, כי עיוותוני כוכבי שמי. לו אהיה סוחר תכריכין, לא יגבעו נישים כל ימי. The English translation: the wheels and the mazalot changed their natural course at my birth. If I were to trade in candles, the sun will not set until my death. I strive to succeed and cannot, for my stars have deformed me. If I were to trade in shrouds, people will never die all the days of my life. He says that his own fate is so bad, it's like the laws of nature changed to make it so bad. That's in terms of his poverty. He was always very poor, lived hand to mouth, depending on the charity of other people. The second one, similar. השכים לבית השר, אומרים כבר רחב, אבוא לעת ערב, אומרים כבר שכב, או יעלה מרכב, או יעלה משכב, או יעלה איש עני, נולד בלי כוכב. The English. When I go early to the house of the dignitary, they say he already left. When I come in the evening, they say he is already gone to bed. Whether he's ridden away or retired to bed, woe is to the poor man born without a star. He says that about his own life. There's no more powerful words than this to describe how he feels about the power of astrology in his own life. We don't have a chart for Ibn Ezra. One time I speculated, but I'm not even going there. I tried to speculate based on his date of death, not of birth, but even that is not sure. So I didn't even try. So I don't have a chart for him, but this is powerful words, and the Hebrew is just hits me in the gut when I read that. Eh, okay, now I'm going to change topic. Now we're going to move to, this concludes my presentation of Ibn Ezra and where it took him and everything that in between. Now I want to move to the Jupiter-Saturn business and see if there's any mention in Ibn Ezra about that. And I have to tell you that to the best of my ability, not much. So here's what I have, and that's what it is. First of all, the question is, as Lorelei, when you contacted me, that was the starting point. Is there a connection between the Jews and the planet Saturn, or the sign of Aquarius, or both? Now, I'm going to just run through these few references here. In the Sefer Maladot, the Nativities, in the section of the ninth house, because the ninth house in the astrological chart has to do with religion, matters of faith. So the red text here. If Saturn or Mars are the planets that are known as the malefic, the difficult ones, the problematic ones, the bad guys. If Saturn or Mars are in the ninth house, except when the native is Jewish. I'm sorry, I should read not just the red, I'm sorry. If Saturn or Mars is in the ninth house, it indicates one who is deceitful in his faith and lies under oath, except when the native is Jewish, for then Saturn will harm less. In other words, if you're a Jewish person with Saturn in the ninth house, you're not deceitful or you're not untrue to your faith. So it implies that somehow there's a connection between, but it doesn't say it straightforward. Okay. But for others, I'm sorry, this is just for Saturn. But if Mars is there, that's interesting. Mars will harm, so that the native will eventually excommunicate himself. So we have a difference between the two malefics. Now he says something similar about something that's known as the lot of the sun. I don't know if many of you are familiar with that. It's called the lots. These are not planets, these are calculated points. And this one is called the lot of the sun, also known as the lot of spirit, related to the ninth house. And he says in a Jewish nativity, I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. Always look at the lot of the sun. If you find that lot, in a Jewish nativity in the sign of Aquarius, and Christian Leo, and Muslim Scorpio, and the ruler of the lot is retrograde, it's a kind of a not a good situation, the person will leave his religion. So the combination of retrograde and particular Aquarius combination. Again, a connection between Jewish faith and Aquarius. This is in the Book of Nativities. In Sefer HaOlam, the Book of the World, which is mundane astrology, it's plain and simple. Mundane astrology, how to understand world events and historical events. Then what you see on the screen, I took a screenshot. I didn't type it in. So it quotes Hanoch HaMitzri. It's a name for a name that's known as Hermes, an ancient writer. We don't know exactly who he was, but there was speculation. Anyway, Hanoch HaMitzri associates planets and signs with different countries, and the yellow says Shemesh im Dli, the sun with Aquarius, Eretz Canaan v'Yavan u'Mitzrayim. So the phrase says Shemesh im Dli, translated as sun with Aquarius, and I wonder if it could be sun in Aquarius, not with Aquarius, but it almost doesn't matter because it's not enough information anyway. Dli, so the Aquarius is here associated with Eretz Canaan, which is the Jewish land, Yavan, Greece, and Egypt. This is repeated in another section, same thing. I don't know if you're aware of it, but this associating countries and lands with a specific sign is ancient practice. It appears in a very elaborate way in Ptolemy's book, the Tetrabiblos, from the 2nd century. Very elaborate scheme of countries are listed, and each one, which sign is in domain of which sign is the ruler or responsible for that country. This is an important scheme because it ties later into analysis of eclipses and Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and so on. So the association of a planet or sign with a country is important as a part of the analysis process. The thing is that it's not terribly consistent. Ptolemy says one thing, and Ptolemy never said that. Ptolemy associated a different sign with that part of the country, with Eretz Canaan. So these sources are not reliable, in my opinion, so I don't want to go by that. But this is what I have in Ebenezer. Plus, this whole idea of associating a sign with a country by itself is not a reliable technique for those of us who study mundane astrology. So this is what I found in Ebenezer, and this is it. This Sefer HaOlam, the book of the world, is about, like I said, mundane astrology. So the rest of the book does use the same doctrines that was prevailing at the time of Ebenezer and before, and Abraham Bar Hiyya, whom I'm going to see in a minute, same thing. This knowledge is inherited from the Arabic astrologers before them, the Islamic astrologer, where astrology thrived. All this knowledge came through the Arabic world, as you all know. And they promoted, especially some of these names, Masala and Abu Mashar, they wrote a lot about mundane astrology, and especially about the great conjunction, Jupiter-Saturn. So all this knowledge, all these doctrines were inherited from the Arabs, lock, stock, and barrel. There was no additional development. Actually, Abraham Bar Hiyya has something interesting. So now this is all I have. If someone comes up with another source that I don't know, or maybe in some of the biblical commentary, which I have not, Ebenezer's biblical commentary, I don't know. But if it was a major thing, Ebenezer would have put it in his books, because this is his real compendium. Okay. Bar Hiyya. Bar Hiyya, I found some interesting statement about Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Actually, this is his book is full of that information. The book is Megillat HaMegaleh, the scroll of the revealer. And again, he was a mathematician, an astronomer, a very brilliant guy. And that book of his analyzes history and also not messianism, but the date, Chishuvei HaKetz, in Hebrew, in Talmudic language, it's called Chishuvei HaKetz, when the Messiah will arrive. Everybody wanted to know that. And this was a prohibition. There's a famous phrase on that, Tipach nafsham shel mechashvei kitzim. So it was not encouraged to try and calculate when the Messiah will come. But this is before before Maimonides was doing that major fight against it. So they were still trying. And this was the best cycle that they could use for that, and that's the Jupiter-Saturn cycle. But Bar Hiyya has an interesting, I call it logical argument against a specific sign ruling over the Jews. I think it's cute. It's right here. Again, I apologize for this too much text. It looks busy, but I had no choice. So I highlighted it, and it's right here at the bottom. Israel אין להם מזל ולא כוכב שהוא ממונה עליהם. No planet is Israel. ודבר ברור, and it's clear, because we already know that all the mazalot and the stars and the whole world was created for Israel. He says that the whole world was created for Israel. So including all the stars. So if everything was created for Israel, how can only one of them be in charge of Israel? So this is I call it logical. But at the same time, he does say something different in another place. So he's not of one mind, but I think that logically, theologically, it's a good, nice argument. Now, this is of interest. I'll make a long story short. Don't even try to read it's too much yellow, but I had to highlight it for me to be able to see things. The chart on the right side is found in that book, Megillat HaMegaleh. But the editor of that book said that it's not certain whether it was in the original, but the planetary positions that are listed in this chart are in the original. Now, all you need to notice in this chart is it has to do with Exodus from Egypt, Exodus. And you can see in the green box here, it says Shabtai Kaf Daled, Tzedek Kaf Daled, Saturn 24, Jupiter 24, same degree in Gli, in Aquarius. So Bar Hiyya's contention is that the cycle, Jupiter-Saturn cycle conjunction started then, and it started, at least for this process, it started with Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Pisces, which is a water sign, and in Aquarius. How can that be? Depends on the calculation of the planets and their orbit. In Hebrew, he calls it Malach Shaveh, Malach Mitzchalef. It has to do with the retrogrades. So that's all I can say now. So in one calculation, at that time, according to Bar Hiyya, at the time, in one calculation, Jupiter-Saturn were at 24 Aquarius, which is a, no, he didn't interpret that. But by the other calculation, it was in Pisces. And then he says Pisces is a water sign, and he makes the connection between Moses, who was thrown in the river Nile, and he was rescued from the waters. So this whole exegesis about the connection between Exodus and the water triplicity. Now, how could Bar Hiyya do that? He was an astronomer, and he calculated the exact cycles. And they say that he even said that the cycle is not exactly 20 years for the conjunction, but 20 years minus 8 months, or 1/8 of the year. In other words, if he knew how to calculate these cycles, at least mathematically, he would have been to calculate all these cycles back, all the way to Bereshit, all the way to the time of Moses. And that's what he did, apparently. So he tells us that Exodus took place in the Aquarius, and it's the connection with the water. And he says Aquarius, even though we in modern astrology we call it air signs, but it is well known that in the constellation of Aquarius there's water. That's why the Aquarius is called the water bearer, and there's a connection between the two constellations in the sky, the fishes and the water bearer. So the whole thing works seamlessly on a conceptual level. And this is, so he calls it Hadibuk Harav Hameid al Malchut Israel. The book is the conjunction. And מתחיל בטריגון המים, the water triplicity במהלך השווה. That's in the Pisces. Okay. So this is Bar Hiyya. And then he goes on to calculate when Moses was born, when Aaron was born. I have to tell you, I tried it with my astrological software. I tried to run it back that far, but it was next to impossible. I gave up because I had to translate the Hebrew dates, the Hebrew calendar into regular. It was next to impossible, so I gave up. So that's the end of that, but I tried. Okay, Lorelai, can I have more time?
Hi, yes.
Please.
It's 1:42. I know that people are going to have some questions, so
Okay,
yeah,
I really wanted to finish at least something about the Jupiter-Saturn
yeah,
cycle.
please, no, please continue.
I have this and one more topic. I would love to do the other one as well. Okay.
Okay, please keep going.
Okay. So now we're getting more technical in terms of the cycle itself and the numbers. Jupiter-Saturn conjunction cycle. This is from today, and the invocation or whatever we call that one that Rabbi Jonathan did was awesome. I felt it in the heart because I visualized the chart as he was doing this. And this was the chart of that moment. This is the chart of the conjunction. It's run for the East Coast. So this is what it looks like in the East Coast. Aries rising, and here is the conjunction with the 11th house and so on. And yes, the sun is at 0 Capricorn, entering the winter solstice. So this is quite amazing, the juxtaposition of the sun at the winter solstice and these two starting this one. Before we continue, I have to tell you that as an astrologer, I have to tell you that in my opinion, the conjunction that we are raving about in Aquarius started for me in Capricorn last year, throughout last year. But that's a technical discussion which I don't want to get into. But these two planets were together in Capricorn for the whole year. They don't have to be point by point, minute by minute on top of each other to make a conjunction. And throughout last year, they were in Capricorn and they acted as a conjunction as part of whatever was going on. I have lots of opinions about it, but not here. But this one is very important because it does begin the cycle of conjunction in the air triplicity. It's called the Great Mutation here, the Great Mutation, Earth to air. So now I'm going to explain this cycle. The cycle works on triplicities. Triplicity is another word for the element. Element is in our context, the element that we're leaving is the earth element, which is the Taurus, Capricorn, and Virgo. That's the one we're leaving. This has been in place for the last 200 years, the cycle inside this element. So I will show the numbers in a minute, but as you can see on the right side, right here, it takes a number of repetition inside the element until it moves to the next element. And by the way, the image below is same, but it was drawn in 1603. It was a great mutation from a water to fire, and it was in Sagittarius. And the reason I like to think about it is because of Johannes Kepler. Johannes Kepler, the famous astronomer who is very important in astrology also, observed it and analyzed it and talked about it. So these major events, which is the great mutation, change of element, were really paid attention to. So here are the numbers. I'll read from the top. Every 20 years, it's that great conjunction, the one we're experiencing now. Every 20 years, it's a conjunction. 60 years is when the conjunction happens in all three signs of the element, like the Taurus and the Taurus and the Virgo and the Capricorn. Total of 60 years. I call it once around the element. But this once around the element repeats 4 times in total of 240 years. And these numbers are not exact, but they're good enough to easy to remember. Now, after 240 years, we have the Great Mutation, and that's where we are now with the Great Mutation. A total of 12 conjunctions, and then we have the Great Mutation. After about 960 years, all 4 elements are covered, and they all start again. So these are the numbers. Now we have really abbreviated. How are they interpreted, these conjunctions, in regular mundane astrology? And again, source and origin is Abu Mashar, the Arabic astrologer. Abu Mashar wrote a lot about this topic. Every 20 years, let's say change of a monarch. Then that's the regular cycle, 20 years. Then the Great Mutation. This is in between. This is the 60 years, the middle. Change of dynasty. You can call it regime. But then we have a new prophet and a new religion. Tongue in cheek, I say that Abu Mashar and the Islamic astrologers needed to legitimize Islam because Islam was a young religion. They had to legitimize it to show that it was written in the stars. So they showed that it coincided. The birth of the Prophet Muhammad coincided with the Great Mutation. And it's true. Muhammad was born in 571, and there was a great mutation, the Great Mutation at 570, I think, right there and then. So that is the general idea. It affects society, politics, society, economics, you name it. Remember, it's the klal, it's the collective. It's not personal. This does not mean that if I read someone's chart and in their chart they have a conjunction of these two, I have a lot to say about it on an individual level. But on a higher level, these are the indication. Changes in society, historical events, dramatic changes. And it's almost easy to see if we go back 20 years to see, and I have a list further down. Of course, all this language can be translated into modern terminology. So you can have a dynasty, or you can call it the Republican Party, or a republic or monarchy. In modern language, in modern life, we have equivalents to all of that. So now I'm here. The Earth triplicity started in 1802, and the year 2000 was the last one in Taurus. And I try to sit back and think, can I interpret the whole period, the whole sequence by way of Taurus, or by way of the Earth triplicity? I don't like to make sweeping generalization because I can say anything, it will be true, and I don't like to do it this way. But as let's say, intellectual game, I will say that if we're talking about the Earth triplicity that we just ended, what could it have in common? So I wrote down territorial, borders redrawn in Europe, typo here, and the Middle East, colonial. The redrawing of borders was in second half of the 19th century in Europe, then the Middle East big time after World War I. So empires, colonialism, we can find a common denominator. But I don't try to do it, especially not with Aquarius coming up. I think that in order to make sense of the air triplicity and Aquarius, we need perspective of 100 years, and I don't have it now. I have to reincarnate to be able to see what it did. So I'm not making any predictions. Maybe space flight, that I like. A change in our relationship with space and the cosmos, more knowledge, more travel, etc. But it's all speculation. I don't think anyone has the perspective for that. All we know is that it's a change, and we know for sure it's a change. But exactly what it is it the age of Aquarius? There are debates about the age of Aquarius, and that comes from the phenomenon of the precession of the equinoxes. And the debate is, has it started yet, or is it already here? I can give you the argument some other time. So there's no clear cutoff, but it coincides in a way that maybe we can give it some sense by way of Aquarius. Let's look at those dates. Some of it is in terms of Jewish history. 1861, I'm reading the list. 1861, conjunction in Virgo. Theodor Herzl was born in 1860, Sun in Taurus. You see, I'm trying to look for connection with the history of Israel. Modern Zionism. Theodor Herzl, Sun in Taurus. He was born into that conjunction. 1881, the conjunctions in Taurus. The first Aliyah, in Israel, Jews coming to Israel, the first Aliyah, which was in that era, exactly in that era. This is the Baron Rothschild and all the attempts to settle on the land. That was very significant. Okay. And then we have also birth of modern Zionism, because the first Zionist Congress was in 1897, still during that year. So this conjunction, we can say, started, or modern Zionism started during that period. I think
And also just to interject, the state of Israel was, born on the 14th.
I was about to say that.
Okay.
And I have the chart. I will bring up the chart of Israel in a minute. I just wanted to run this list, okay? Because I have something about this chart itself. Yes. The Taurus connection is just about unbelievable. Okay. Then 1901, we have World War I, regime change in Europe and the Middle East, pogroms in Russia, Jews begin to immigrate in numbers. The pogroms in Russia, which was very early, 1905, I think, or so, really started the immigration of Jews from Eastern Europe to the West, big time. This is, to me, incredible. 1921, Jewish-Arab conflict begins following World War I and the Balfour Declaration. This is textbook Jupiter-Saturn Conjunction, and how it starts. It starts a whole new, losing my English here, trajectory, okay? A whole new trajectory, which was World War I, after World War I. And of course, all the borders in the Middle East were redrawn, and great empires disappeared, because the Ottoman Empire went away, and England started, England and France. So the whole thing was rearranged. In 1940, needs no explanation, World War II, and as we know, leading to the state of Israel. I'm not saying any more about that. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's like come out of the ashes. 1961, the 60s, the Cold War, East-West tension, big time. I don't have, how could I have forgotten? The 6-Day War, my goodness. The 6-Day War was there, and it changed the political map of Israel big time. As we all know how things changed following the 6-Day War. 1981, this I noticed more in the world. I know events were going on in Israel, but not by way of changing history, not historical changes. In 81, I already lived here. I came here. Economy turnaround in the world. It became capitalism took hold again. Reagan was elected, and it was the beginning of the end of the Soviet era. This was in 1981. This was not in Earth. That was already in Libra, that one conjunction. It put the foot in the door. And then after that, it was still in Taurus. And to me, it marked world terrorism and at the same time, advent of technology and all the computers that we're enjoying now, personal computers. So this is a short run on these conjunctions throughout 150 years. I'm sure that someone else might interpret it differently, but it's my show, so I'm doing it this way. Okay. I'm changing gears a little bit because to me it's one and the same, but it sounds like far cry from where I started with the Talmud and Ebenezer, but it's still Israel. So what I have here is, I call it, let the planets speak of themselves, astrological continuity in time and history in the chart of Israel, 1948. And I'm saying in the chart of Israel is the chart of the collective. Here is the collective in action, not just in theory, but in action. This is mundane astrology. Countries and states can have charts. Cities can have charts, as long as there's a moment of inception, a moment of birth. Now, we identify the birth of Israel as May 14 on a Friday at 4 p.m. exact at the Tel Aviv Museum and at the Art Museum in Tel Aviv, exact location. And this is the chart. Talk about continuity. I said that Theodor Herzl had the sun in Taurus. Ben Gurion had the sun in Libra, and if you look at the ascendant here, 23 Libra, this is exactly Ben Gurion. He had sun at 23 Libra. There's always a connection between the chart of the leader and the country, and that's one example. So what do I mean by continuity? This is a fascinating observation that I came to throughout my years in astrology. I'll try to make it very simple. When you have a clear starting point like this one, so it's a chart, and you can use it as is. But what about countries that have always been there, like Egypt? Egypt has been there as long as we can think of, or England, or France, or China. These are entities that have always been there. So do they have a starting point? We cannot put our finger on it. So here's the idea that if you look at an event during the course of the life of that entity, and a clear event such as a change of regime or revolution or a new king or any of that, or coronation, any of these major changes, and these are events that can have a chart, you can make an assumption that there is a continuity from one chart to the next, from one event to the next. And this kind of continuity is maintained usually astrologically through the sign of the sun and the moon, and also the signs on the angles being the ascendant and the midheaven. So it maintains continuity through these signs. So if I'm talking about the chart of Israel, yes, Israel, modern Israel, 1948, but the Jews didn't start then. The Jewish nation, the Jewish people had a much earlier start, and we don't know. Maybe Bar Hiyya knows, but I don't know. So this was my thesis. Can I take the chart of Israel and assume that it's a point in time, and all I know that it highlights sensitive area, astrological, zodiacal sensitive areas. And if I go back in history, historical events, I will find transits in the sky in the same areas. It's like transit to the chart backward, but it's not exactly backward. It's like sensitive areas that are always in operation. That's the thesis. And I wrote here sensitive zodiacal areas in Jewish chronology. Aries and Libra and Cancer and Capricorn. These are the four angles. You see the midheaven, the ascendant, and the so on. Then we have Taurus for the sun. Then we have Leo because we have the moon and Saturn here, and Sagittarius right here. And these areas, especially the angles, seem to show up in historical events, and I want to show you a few, just to kind of make my point. This is high speculation. I'll be the first one to admit, but I cannot resist that. In terms of very historical events, ancient events, chronology is very, very speculative. You cannot count on that 100%. But what if I could, just for the heck of it? Again, apology for too much stuff on the screen. I had it done. This is a screenshot. I did this lecture 12 years ago. And this is I took from that lecture. So here is what I did. I ran the planets with attention to Jupiter and Saturn. You can see in the yellow square, with attention to Jupiter and Saturn during certain time in history, to see if they hit degrees or sensitive areas in the chart of Israel from 1948. So I have the chart here. The event here, believe it or not, is King Saul, the ascent of King Saul, the first monarchy in Israel. And the year I used is 1020 BCE, highly speculative. Other sources will give me another year, but I chose to go with that year. And astrologically, I like it. If you look at Saturn in Libra, Jupiter in Libra, Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in Libra, Libra is the ascendant. Now, King David, 20 years later, 1000. Again, don't argue with me on the precision of the dates. I could be absolutely wrong, but it looks good. Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Cancer. What is Cancer? The midheaven in the chart. More speculation? King Solomon. I have to tell you that this floored me because King Solomon built the temple. And I have to tell you as an aside that when I read Jupiter-Saturn in people's charts astrologically, these two combined always, and I mean 99.9% of the time, have to do with buildings, literally, architecture and building and construction and buildings again. And you build a temple. It's the ultimate building you can build is a temple. And it's in Libra. Libra is the exaltation. It's known as the exaltation of Saturn. So that blew me away. I could be wrong, but it's too good to leave alone. So I don't know if he was born then or no. The temple was built. That's it. The year he was born, but 30 years later, 930. Year later, the planets are Jupiter, Saturn. One is in Taurus, which is okay with me, and Saturn is in Scorpio on the opposite side, still affecting the Taurus in the chart of Israel, that sensitive area. Okay. Well, we know what happened eventually, how the kingdom was split into two. Maybe that's why we have the opposition here, because then we have Yehuda and Israel. Yeah. Next is, let me go through at least a few more and then we're done. No, okay, the first temple is destroyed, exiled to Babylon, is Saturn. Well, this is not about it's not always, these findings that I have are not always about the conjunction. It's about being in the sensitive areas. So Saturn here, the first temple is destroyed. Saturn is in the Cancer area, which is the midheaven of the chart of Israel. Major sensitive area. Okay. And we have a few more. Here's a good one. Look at Neptune at 23 Aries. 23 Aries is right here, the opposite of the ascendant. I have to tell you that the person, a colleague of mine, bless her soul, Diana Rosenberg, Jewish, passed away, a New Yorker. She drew my attention to this the very first time. That's when I started like crazy on this journey of the chart of Israel. She told me one day, she said, do you know that Neptune was at 23 Aries in both the destruction of the first temple and the second temple? And I said, what? And I went to the charts. I think one was Aries, one was Libra, but they're same degrees, exactly on both sides. Neptune, the meaning of Neptune as chaos and destruction was like right on. Destruction of the temple and the exile. In another work, I've looked at the planet Neptune in the history of the Jews, separately from this. Just Neptune in the history of the Jews. It's a whole different take on things. But here I want to focus on Jupiter-Saturn. Let me see if I have any more goodies. What do we have here? Koresh Declaration. Hatzarat Koresh, Jews return. Well, Neptune is in the Leo. It's which is where the moon and Saturn is. So that fits the Neptune. And Jupiter again is in the Taurus. I don't know if I can use that. Next is, that's a good one. Hashmonean, Maccabees, Maccabean, Merida Maccabim. Hanukkah. Now look at Hanukkah at the bottom here, where the red square is. Look at Jupiter is identical to Jupiter in the chart of Israel. When I saw that, I fell off my chair because it's such a Jupiterian event. And to make it even better, remember whose effigy, whose statue was thrown out of the temple? Zeus, the Greek god Zeus, which is Jupiter, the Roman Jupiter. So the symbolism was so thick. It's the the redemption from the oppression of the Greeks and throwing out Jupiter out of the temple in the sign of Sagittarius.
Is that at the galactic center, Miera? I can't see the number.
The galactic center is in tropical 26. Yes. Mm-hmm. This is the galactic center. I like the galactic center only because in my own chart it's somewhere, but I don't use it in reading charts as much. I don't think it has a personal effect as much, unless we're looking at my relationship with the cosmos, and I have plenty of that. But for ordinary chart reading, I do not necessarily put it in. But in terms of Israel, Jupiter in the third house, every time I travel to Israel, and it's quite often bar the virus, every time I go to Israel, the roads, the Akvishim, the road system changes. There's always new roads, new intersection, new roads, new signage. Everything is continuously building the roads. That's Jupiter in the third house. Not to mention that it's the house of scholarship and studies, and the academic institutions in Israel are literally Or Lagoim. I like to use the phrase Or Lagoim, the Technion, the Machon Weizmann, the whole thing, the universities, everything is Israel. Academic institutions are Or Lagoim. To me, is that Jupiter in Sagittarius. Incidentally, Chaim Weizmann, who became the first president, who was instrumental in the Balfour Declaration, he was a Sagittarian. It all fits. And then we have Machon Weizmann, which is the scientific institution named after him. It all works in the third house, and we have a lot of fortune there too. So astrological symbolism abounds. You can run with it any which way and find stuff. So this is let me see. I think I'm going to end here. I showed you enough. So I'm going to go to here. And here's my conclusion to this whole journey from the Talmud, Maimonides, Ebenezer, and others. To me, it's about hashgacha klalit v'hashgacha pratit. Hashgacha klalit, divine protection of the collective. That's hashgacha klalit, and nothing shows it better than 1948, and you all know what I'm talking about. That's an example of hashgacha klalit, and that's historical because it operates on a very high level. Divine protection for the klal, for the group. And then we have hashgacha pratit, divine providence in the individual in one's own charts. And I am concluding yesh mazal, and that's how the mazal operates. And when my students get desperate because they see all these negative things in the chart and they say, what does it mean? And I say, my conclusion is always trust your chart. Trust your own chart, it will protect you. Because when I say that, it sounds like the planets will protect you, but that's not what I mean. I think that the individual chart has just as much divine intentionality. And as a divine intentionality, this is how I put it. This is my last slide, Laureline. I'm saying that the universe is meaningful and purposeful and in constant equilibrium. And free will is the inner perception of the intent of the chart and the agenda of the soul. And I could put the word God in here, but my students don't like God, so I'm just calling it the universe. But there is divine protection, and the chart has that. And it's very easy to see when you look at charts. So this kind of belief is not just a pretty word that I say just to, as an excuse. It's provable. And it always leaves you on a high note, no matter what. Thank you very much. Done.
Thank you. Yashar kochech.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, wow.
Thank you,
Fantastic.
thank
Bravo,
you.
bravo.
Baruch Hashem, I feel like we should all stand up and cheer.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
It's a journey.
Wow.
It's a trip and a half.
It's a trip, trip.com.
Wow,
Wow,
I wondered about Jyotish teachings in the Eastern teachings of Hinduism. They
Mhm.
often speak about astrology and their tradition being even older than ours. I've often had this discourse as a Jewish person, deeply connected to many things we're talking about. And I don't know if you have an answer or some guidance, because in some of the work that I've done internationally with different groups, it does come up. Now, many years ago, I would hear 5,000 years, Israel 5,000 years, Hinduism 5,000. Now they're talking about 7,000, 8,000 in the billion plus. I wonder if you've come across any statement or something that would be.
Okay, you're talking about Vedic, right? Your questions about
Jyotish, about the Jyotish.
Jyotish, right?
Yeah.
Well, they like to give themselves a lot of
Credit.
credit for antiquity and having the wisdom. They don't talk about 5,000 years. I've heard numbers like 40,000 years and the tens of thousands. They claim a lot of antiquity.
Yeah.
A lot. I don't buy that. However, and also there are a few facts here. One is that it's well known and documented that Western astrology, at least connection with Western astrology, for sure happened during the time of Alexander the Great, because he conquered northern India and all of the Middle East. And when you have a big empire, all the borders break down and knowledge travels. So knowledge, there was a lot of exchange of knowledge, clear exchange during Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic Empire, and it ended up, as we know, in Alexandria, Hellenistic astrology and so on. Now, when you look at some terminologies of Vedic, the actual terminologies, they are so similar to the Latin words, to the Western words. So it's almost the same word, almost the same concept, the same idea. There's tons of similarity, but there's also dissimilarities, such as what's known as the dasha system. And the lunar mansion is not so different, but the dasha system. So it's quite possible that astrology developed independently over there, as it did in China and other places. But it's also obvious that there was exchange of knowledge, and it's not that ancient, not so much antiquity. I recently read an article about exchange or travel of Western astrology to China around the 700s or 600s or something like that. So I wouldn't fall for that. If they want to claim more authority, fine. I don't argue with that. I don't go there at all. All I know is that there is similarity and there's difference in techniques. And well, I tried to go to try to practice a little bit Vedic, but I came back to Western. It didn't. I didn't feel I needed it. Western astrology is just, to me, is it.
I remember hearing that Ishmael's Hagar's children, that there was actually the transfer when they speak of what they knew, that it was the travel of going to those countries where that knowledge was really in
But these
view.
are prehistoric. The idea is interesting, Ishmael children, but we don't have dates. I need hard facts to make this kind of claim. Symbolic, fine. Symbolic is fine with me. But in terms of hard facts, all I know is that if I look at the language, the terminology, the name for house, the name for angle, the name for the planets, there's similarity.
Yeah, but that's
So
where it stops.
The big difference is the zodiac, as you know. They use the sidereal zodiac, we use the tropical zodiac, but that's like a decision. The decision to stick, while they stuck with the sidereal, we do the tropical. Okay, this is too technical, I think, for
It's
this.
it's like VHS and beta, if people are old enough to remember that. You have to pick something and stick with it, right? All
Yeah,
the way through it.
let's say yes.
Lahavdil. But I wanted to just say one thing about the Rambam, about your discussion of the Rambam, which was absolutely fabulous, by the way. Everything you did was absolutely fabulous. I feel so filled with information. It's so great. Ironically or not, even though he was you described it very well, the way he was very just imperious and strict about it, but he still permitted the use of astrology to make segulot. And there was a whole machloket or problems, or people were like upset about it. And, you know,
nobody is immune. It's what I said. No one is immune. And for him, it said, well, if it gets a better medicine, why not?
Right. Well, he go ahead, Jonathan.
Well,
Sorry.
that was my rabbinic thesis is all about that, which is he allowed for psychological reasons for people to be healed by segulot that worked empirically.
Okay.
And I think that the Rambam was able to permit psychosomatic healing under certain circumstances. And so even though you have other astral magical objects that he forbade, he allowed the segulot to work because his patients wanted them. So he was wise enough to give a heter on this.
You see, the whole effort is to prevent hereticism, to prevent abandoning the faith.
Right.
So if you begin to ask the hard questions about fate and the immutability of the natural law, then that can lead to hereticism. But using the segula, so Rambam was very wise. He knew the human nature. You know, people need to believe in something. And segula is fine. You know, it's like having a cup of tea, but it's not the hard question. It's not, yeah. If something I want to say, I forgot. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Do you think Rambam, when he gave that harsh answer, like, no, it's not astrological, were you saying, I thought I heard you hinting that it was probably political because this was going out to the masses?
Yes, exactly.
Right? Because I remember reading in the Moreh, he was referencing Ofanim, Chayot Kodesh, and and as you know, as planets and constellations of the zodiac, and so that is with it. So you don't really believe that he didn't believe that. He was protecting.
Knowledgeable. He would remember what I quoted about the Hamonim, the masses who are fools and don't have the right mind to, and he puts it very well in his Moreh Nevuchim also, who has the depth of the intellect, and moreover, that's very subtle, moreover, who can live with a paradox? To live with a paradox, and that's where I am at. How do you live with a paradox? Believing in a divine protection, and yet looking at the chart, and you know, Saturn, you cannot move Saturn. And he says it in the Moreh also. Normal people need clear answer. They want either black and white. It's a yes or a no. Living with the paradox requires very high intellect, so you don't go crazy. And I mean crazy, I mean going crazy. And the word is insane. I forgot to say, but I'm going to say it now. As everybody was talking about Sefer Yetzirah and so on, and in my writing on Sefer Yetzirah, in my introduction, I had a big speculation. I call it speculation. Who could have been the author of Sefer Yetzirah? Of course, we don't know. But I had a speculation which I just like. And I said, maybe it's the one from the Agadah, the four who entered the Pardes. Arba'a shenichnesu laPardes. One of them was called Acher. Remember the Acher? Elisha ben Avuya, I think. He went insane and he abandoned the religion. And why? Because he discovered things. As he went into the Pardes, which is all these higher realm of knowledge, it's my take, he came to that point of paradox of either you lose your mind or you have to take one direction. And he was the Acher. And the word Acher means the other, the one who is different. Sometimes I feel like I am also an Acher, seriously, because I feel like I'm somewhere on the planet Uranus. But a person like him, with that kind of pursuit, with that kind of quest, could have written something like that. Because as Gabriel said, it's nothing like Genesis. Sometimes I say it's like computer hardware and software. So the hardware is in Yetzirah and the software is in Genesis. You know, put the contents in. Let's have the building blocks and then put some spirit into it. I can go on and on. Yeah.
You're wonderful. So wonderful.
Anything else? I'm done. We're done, Lorelei?
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Fantastic, amazing.
Big claps from everybody.
Pleasure. Oh, I'm so blessed with all of you. You are like, for years I've been waiting for this audience. I think, Lorelei, you said it in another way, because I've talked about this in my astrological world a few times, not much, and it never hit a spot. The audience was not there enough. They didn't have all this background. So I felt like I was talking to myself most of the time, but it was so important to me that I had to talk about it. So a lot of the material today is from way back, but you people, it's like what the doctor ordered, a perfect audience. So thank you, Lorelei.
Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. This is my dream come true. I feel like I'm just in another world right now. I can't even believe this day is happening. This is the sandbox. This is the treehouse fort that I've been wanting to play in for such a long time. I'm so happy you're all here playing with me, and we're playing a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful game together. It's beyond. It's just beyond.
We're very blessed to have you, dear Lorelei.
Yeah.
Mistress of ceremonies. And
I would like to say in terms of,
wait, our wonderful co-organizer, let's have a little applause for Lorelei on her birthday.
Yeah.
Our executive director of the Aquarian Minyan. How fitting, how incredibly fitting to have such a wise woman and wonderful mother and grandmother. May she live long, may she be happy and healthy.
thank you, amen,
Hey,
amen.
Lorelei.
You know, Mira,
Amen.
my natal Venus is in Aquarius at 3 degrees, and I have Venus rising, which makes Venus my ruling planet. So
Enjoy the journey. Enjoy the Aquarius journey. It's beginning for you.
I know it's all just starting. So I want to say we've been here since 9:30. It's 2:26. Some of us might have a biological need
Bio
for a
break.
moment. We're going to come back after a break. I'm going to play some Victoria Hanna videos, and then we'll start up again with myself and Reb Yonatan Seidel, armed to the teeth as he is with his PhD and everything that went into it.